Hello folks, and welcome to another tornado outbreak short summary. This is quite the old one. We are looking at the tornado outbreak from March 16th through the 17th of 1942. Seeing our surface map from this day, which happened to be a Monday, the link for this where I got this map will be in the description, as well as all of the rest of the sources that we see, or sorry, that I used. There is a low pressure centered directly in the middle of Oklahoma City. We have a warm front just south of just south of central Illinois, and then we have a cold front throughout the rest of Oklahoma and throughout most of Texas. Well, this system would cause 28 confirmed tornadoes over 8 states, from Mississippi to uh, Illinois, and then even one in South Carolina. We would also see 18 tornadoes cause at least one death. This is one of the highest numbers out of all of the confirmed tornadoes from an outbreak to be killer. This is upwards of 60%, and we'll talk about that at the very end of this video in the significance part. In total, this event would cause 149 deaths, injuries of more than 1,000, reaching around 1,312 that were injured, and in 1942 US dollars, 5.25 million in damage. Adjusted for inflation, that is $87.1 million in damage. Right, folks, as always, chronologically starting with the first notable tornado and then moving our way to the last of them. Our first one occurred west of Ivesdale to northeast of Alvin, Illinois. This F4 was most likely caused by the warm front that I just talked about earlier, and this F4 had a path of a pretty damn long 97 kilometers and reached in at 365 meters wide. That is 400 yards wide. This tornado would cause 12 deaths, 60 injuries, and $300,000 worth of damage. This was a pretty early afternoon storm happening at just half an hour after noon, and we will see that most of our notables actually occurred more than 3 hours after this, which would be coinciding along the time that the cold front would be moving along the area. So we see that the low pressure centered in Oklahoma was moving pretty fast for all of these to be happening. And when it's positioned, you saw on that map along Oklahoma and Texas, we're seeing tornadoes in Mississippi and even one in South Carolina. So this thing is moving pretty fast. But in any case, we'll get to there when we get there. Note that this tornado is possibly the second tornado from this storm. However, there is no first tornado in any database that I could find, so this is, at least officially, the only tornado from this storm. Note that this F4 would damage or destroy 50 homes. Half of these homes would be damaged or destroyed in some way in Alvin, Illinois. Moving it down to Mississippi, this F4 went from south of Berkeley to New Harmony, Mississippi. This tornado coursed a even more impressive 180 kilometers and reached in at around 550 meters wide at its widest points. This tornado would cause 63 deaths, 500 injuries, and cause $600,000 worth of damage. This tornado would encounter 2 school buses. Actually, this was in the town of Otokalofa, however that's pronounced. It would also be this town that received the worst damage, and also where this tornado encountered the 2 school buses. It flipped both of them, damaging them. Obviously, school buses don't like to be flipped. They're kind of not really meant to, That's why the wheels are on the bottom of it and not all around the vehicle. But it would be from one of these school buses that a child did die because of the rolling of the school bus. The first school bus that it encountered, again, did roll it, but only caused injuries. It would also be in Otokalufa, again, sorry if I butchered that name, where a school would be completely destroyed, and we can see the steps of said school behind former students of the school. It would be the superintendent of the school district, and therefore really the superintendent of the school, that would be killed. The superintendent, however, is responsible for arguably a much, much lesser death toll than what we would have otherwise seen from this tornado, as the superintendent was thankfully paying attention to the weather, noticed uh, problems with the weather, it's not calm, and let these schools out early, which is indeed why this F4 encountered some school buses, but things could have been much, much worse. Um, it is indeed, don't get me wrong, it is indeed very tragic that the person responsible for saving many lives did die themselves. Um, but still, a very, very good thing came from the superintendent. Again, that being that this person let the schools out early. We move on to the star of the show. This is the south-southeast of Dunlap to southeast of Henry, Illinois F5, or the Lacan F5. This is indeed the most powerful tornado from the outbreak, and it tracked 48 kilometers, reaching in at 365 meters wide. Again, that is 400 yards wide. This tornado caused either 6 or 7 deaths, depending on the source. I found both. Injured 70, that's solid, and $600,000 in damage. That also did not change. This tornado, as you can see, this is the pink line, the guesstimated tornado path, did pretty closely follow the Illinois River, in fact, crossing it at one point. And very thankfully, this F5 would spare Dunlap, Chillicothe, Rome, Hopewell, and even Henry. However, it would be in Lacan that many, many of the that much of the damage occurred. I should rephrase. In fact, 1/4 of the community of Lacan was destroyed. More than, I think it was 60 whole blocks. In fact, we even managed to get quite a few damage photos, as well as even a photo of the tornado itself, which is pretty impressive around this time. Moving back down south to Tennessee, the Bethel Springs to Beacon F4 tracked just around a very highly guesstimated 60 kilometers, as I had to find these two towns myself, and then by literally putting a ruler onto my screen and then measuring what Google Maps told me was 10 kilometers, um, I did the maths. So that's a very, very rough 60 kilometers, as no source had a track for me. So again, that's why I had to find it myself. But we do know, sources do say that this tornado was around 730 meters wide. Sources also indicate that this tornado killed 15, injured 200, and caused $400,000 worth of damage. Now, the problem here is that the only source that I was able to find was Dr. Grisoulis, which is not a bad source at all. This man is a tornadologist, so I will take his word with this. This tornado apparently thankfully spared many towns, and those that it did hit were sparsely populated, but again did not directly. It didn't go through like the main part of the town, is what I'm trying to say here. So a F4 that didn't necessarily do too much, yet also did a lot at the same time. Our fifth notable here out of 7, by the way, this is the Northern Baldwin, Mississippi F4. This tornado only had a path of 8 kilometers long and reached 300 yards wide, that's 270 meters wide. This tornado would cause 5 deaths, 50 injuries, and $250,000 worth of damage. This was one of 2 tornadoes to strike Baldwin. It was the first of which to do so. The second tornado followed very closely after this one, was an F3 and actually did worse damage as the F3 went right through the downtown area. This tornado, the F4, went through the more sparsely developed northern part of Baldwin. Even though I say sparsely developed, this tornado still affected 50 homes, many of which being destroyed, and several of which that were destroyed were completely leveled. Our sixth notable here is where we see even less information on these tornadoes, if you can believe it. This tornado went from north of Canyonville to north of Summit, Kentucky. This F4 trekked a pretty impressive 48 kilometers and reached in at 180 meters wide, that is 200 yards wide, causing 9 deaths, 40 injuries, and $150,000 along its path. The only thing that I could find from even the NWS was that this tornado caused deaths here and there and just destroyed 20 homes, with some of them being completely leveled. Alright folks, our last notable here takes us to southeast of Goshen, Indiana. This F4 tracked 16 kilometers and reached 180 meters wide. This tornado would cause only 2 deaths, though also injuring 53 and causing a pretty staggering $500,000 worth of damage. Note that this tornado was most likely anywhere from F2 to F3 for most of its life, before affecting Goshen, where it narrowed and intensified. It would be just on the outskirts of Goshen that this tornado would affect 90 homes, destroying or damaging them in various ways. We see anywhere from some relatively major damage here in the bottom 2 photos to completely destroyed to pretty majorly damaged down here at the top. Sorry, up there at the top photos. Again, this tornado narrowed and intensified just on the outskirts of Goshen, although not directly impacting Goshen, kind of like, it almost seems like that it went around Goshen, but it really didn't. There's just outskirts to the north, or sorry, to the southeast. So that is just what happened there. All of our notables are accounted for here. That's 7 for 7. And note that in late March, this is a pretty in-season outbreak, although a quite the violent one. Um, March is just around where the climatology for tornadoes is kind of all over the Great Plains and the Deep South as well, just at least east of the Rockies, and you're fine for seeing tornadoes in March, except the high plains generally. So again, pretty in season, albeit a quite violent one, tornado outbreak. What surprises me more though is just how well documented this outbreak is. Even into the 60s, you're not getting the most information with tornado outbreaks. So for something in 1942 to be so well documented is an extremely pleasant surprise, because I was concerned that I had heard of this outbreak because I live in central Illinois. I have heard of the Lacan F5. Researching it, I found out it was part of this outbreak. And so again, pleasantly surprised I was able to do a video on this, and not just the Lacan F5. I spoke about the 18 killer tornadoes earlier, but we're gonna focus right now on the violence. This outbreak has one of the highest percentages of violent tornadoes to happen in an outbreak. Granted, we're only talking 28 confirmed tornadoes, but still 7 violents. That is a 25%. That is 25% of the tornadoes that were violent from this outbreak. Not a easy feat to achieve. Let's compare this to the super outbreaks. Kind of an unfair comparison. There's a lot more tornadoes with these, but I digress. I still did it anyway. With the 74 super, out of 148 tornadoes, 30 of them were violent. That is a percentage of 20%. That is, it's not exactly 20%, I know. I know it's not exactly 20, but we're rounding up because you can't have 0.1 of a tornado be violent, technically. Technically you can, but no. I'm not playing that game. And with the 2011 super outbreak, 15 out of 360 were violent, so that is 4%. At the very beginning, I mentioned the amount of killer tornadoes, and that is here at the very end. Again, this tornado outbreak has one of the highest numbers of killer tornadoes in an outbreak at 18. For comparison, with the super outbreaks, 1974 saw 49 out of 148 be killer. 2011 saw 31 out of 360. Those percentages are 18 out of 28, that is 64%. 49 out of 148, that is 33%. That is indeed rounding down. And 31 out of 360 is rounding up from 8.6%, 9% of the tornadoes being killer. This outbreak is pretty intense, you know? Again, 1/4, a quarter of the tornadoes that were confirmed, yes, confirmed, around 53% of all tornadoes annually in the United States until 1950 were undocumented, but that's neither here or there, were violent. That is insane. However, this tornado outbreak is not really all that known, not really all that talked about, unless, like me, you're from the area that got affected by one of the violent tornadoes here. In fact, the Lacan F5 is, to date, the last F5 or EF5 to affect central Illinois. I'd be very happy if it stayed that way. We have had some violence in the past years, but again, those weren't F5s or EF5s. With that being said, folks, that is all that I have for the 1942 outbreak. I hope that you all learned something from this one and enjoyed this video. I thank you all so much for watching.